Tonight I wanted to talk about materials in landscape, but probably not in the way that you're used to having someone talk to you about materials in landscape. I feel like oftentimes conversations about materials in landscape feel like a conversation about decisions that happen in a process of a series of decisions that you make as you're moving a design forward. But one thing that has always really excited me about working at surface design is that we start that conversation really early. They're actually part of our concept development. And we draw concept from all corners of the universe, from historical narrative, from site conditions, purely from a functional kind of standpoint. But I think that what happens when we approach the conversation about materials early on is it really pushes us to be innovative in the way that we're thinking about how things interface, where materials come from, how they get assembled. And that's just something that has always really excited me about working at surface design. So I've selected 4 projects tonight to talk about. They're all different in scale. They're all San Francisco projects. I'm going to present them in chronological order and also kind of talk about how those have fit into my story as kind of becoming a landscape architect. And so without further ado, so I'm going to talk about Land's End Visitor Center first, which is probably a project that many of you have been to in San Francisco. It sits right on the edge of San Francisco. So this is the former Sutro Baths, which was a public seawater swimming facility that burned down during demolition in the 1960s. It was opened at the early part of the 20th century. And when we first were approached to work on this project, what was there was simply the baths, the ruins, the site. And so, you know, we started to study this site. There was a lot of kind of clues to the histories that are there. You can see the kind of palimpsest of the baths house. We started to draw kind of inspiration from the sort of epic landscape that exists there, the cliffs, the bluffs. We started to really tinker around with the remnants, some of which you don't really completely understand. The site is not super well documented, so it's a little bit of a landscape detective problem. So you can find old floor plates and building materials. And one thing that we kind of found really early on was a lot of oyster shells. There used to be a lot of oyster shacks that lined this part of San Francisco in the 50s and the 60s, and they would just chuck these shells out back of these restaurants, and over time they just kind of assembled. And that was sort of, I think, the first little light bulb that went off in our heads of that there was more to this site that could be kind of drawn and used for materials. This is actually, we turn these oyster shells into mulch, so this is just mulch that's on the site now. You can go see it. So this is an axo of the site, so you can see how it sits at the edge of San Francisco. I like to show these. The site looks nothing like this, but this was what I did when I was an intern at Surface Design a long time ago, and I remember staying up really late to work on these renderings, and then none of this actually got built. But we were, even in these quick collages, we were thinking about how we could reuse some of the materials that were on site. We were told really early on from the Park Service that, you know, they were having to thin out some of these groves of trees, and so that there might be some wood material that we could use. So early on we were testing, well, how can we use wood as paving, as walls? The site is very rugged, and part of the prompt for the project was a visitor center, which was done by EHDD, who are local architects and great. its function was to provide sort of basic necessities of restroom, gift shop. But also, there was a really kind of strong interest to have this piece of architecture feel like it was connected to the landscape. So even in these early sketches, we were thinking about how we would integrate those two things. The piece of architecture very quickly became a series of concrete walls with glass facades so that it was permeable. And you can see how we started to pull those lines of the architecture out into the landscape. And they even started to inform some of the material decisions that we were making about paving and walls. So this is a zoomed in. For anyone that hasn't been there, this is the visitor center. So you can see restroom, gift shop. There's a little coffee shop there too. A promenade that marches kind of along the edge of the upper part of the Sutro baths. And the site design is very simple. It's not a big site. It has sort of little nooks cut into it to provide shelter. It's very windy out there. And the components of the landscape really are a series of sand dunes with natural native plantings and these little areas to kind of channel people into moments where they can seek protection from the wind. It's a very simple program. Another thing that was really great about working on this project early on, so I did those early renderings as an intern, and then I came back in my first year of kind of being out in the world from landscape school, and the project was moving forward, and there was a budget, and it was very small, and so this was a really kind of great springboard into, I think, practice in trying to maintain these fantastic ideas that we had, but really work within the means that were available to us. And one thing that was really available to us was all of these artifacts that were in storage at the Golden Gate National Parks District. So at Fort Miley, they have these bunkers filled with doors and tables and chairs and statues. Some of these were actually Mayor Sutro, who built the Sutro baths, had an estate across the street. So some of these are, an urn from his terrace, weird junk that had basically sat in storage for 50 years that they said we could use, which we thought was amazing. So we went in there, we got our hands on all these materials, we brought them out into the site. People are always asking me, why is there a lion at Land's End? I'm like, well, because there used to be a lion at Mayor Sutro's estate, and it was available, and we thought it was so cool, and it was free. So you can see those materials started to make their way out to the site. We knew that we needed to provide protection from the wind. And we also wanted to have this kind of dialogue between the landscape that we are creating and sort of the natural landscape that you would find on the coast. And so we started to develop this idea about sand dunes and how to organize sand dunes with windscreens. The sand from the site, we spent a lot of time looking around for this. It actually came from an excavation site in Soma. So this is now, I think this is the site this is 8th Street here, and this is Market. Now there's a huge apartment building here, but the sand was gifted to us, so we took that. That's what was used to make the sand dunes. These windscreens were ripped from trees that had been removed for safety reasons. So you can see those start to play with the architectural lines. We also use these trees to construct a lot of the furniture that's on site. So you can see these windscreens going in. And I think what happened, it was never a super intentional part of the design, but we started to notice other kind of conversations happening between the design of this site and its context. These trees marching along the coast and these sand dune fences mimicking that movement. This was right, as things were kind of finishing up construction. It's interesting to see how these things have worn and silvered, and they really kind of, they are sort of this direct interpretation of that planting that's back there. The Golden Gate National Parks District has very strict requirements on planting, and they have things mapped out down to sub-watersheds, and plants have to be sourced from those. Again, we were working within this tight budget, so actually the planting installation work was done by volunteers who are working in the Presidio and other kind of parts of the Golden Gate National Parks District. So a really fun kind of experience to see how you can utilize a community to kind of be involved in that process. So this is, one of those days when we were there. And this is it now, if anyone's been there. It looks more like this. This was also, this was 2014, so the idea or the technology or the interest in kind of using social media to geotag things was still really new. And I remember being really kind of surprised when I started to see things like this pop up. And now we're super used to this, right? But it was sort of the first experience that I had in realizing that, when you're creating these landscapes, you're also creating these touchstones that people have with a city that they're visiting or a city that they live in. And we started to see all these little things, and they were most of them were around these statues that we had pulled out. And I think that was a really kind of valuable lesson for us in that, wow, we can, it doesn't take much to create these kind of little nodes of interest where people gravitate towards. They want to, show that they've been there, they create memories there, or they link them to memories. And, still when you go and look at hashtag Lands End Lookout, there's just endless amounts of this guy with the lion. And I think it's funny to look at, that these objects were just sitting in the dark for so long, and now they're all over the internet, and people kind of, recognize them as landmarks.
It's got to be really useful for anything post-occupancy. You can just look at the hashtag, and you can easily just see where people take all their photos.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because now I feel like sometimes clients even request, what is the Instagram moment? It's like, oh, okay. This is the old days of the Instagram moment. The second project I wanted to talk about happened soon after Lands End Lookout. It's Fort Point Overlook. And at the same time that we were working on Lands End, we were working on a plaza for the 75th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge, which was a fairly simple and functional landscape. There's thousands of people that move through here. There's tour buses. There's lots of traffic that's getting on the bridge. We worked with Mark Jensen, who's a local architect who did this pavilion, which had a similar function to the one at Lands End. And this was really, it's a very simple, elegant space. And as we were finishing this up, we were asked to submit a proposal for a sort of side dish project to this, which Fort Point Overlook, which was always there. It was just a piece of gravel that people would go down to, to watch the sunset at the bridge. It actually has a better vantage point than the kind of big plaza. And so as part of this work, we designed these bike trail connections, and you can see this space sits right on the edge of the bluff. We knew early on that we were going to be working in concrete, just because of the nature of where the site sits. We needed to retain soil, and it's very rugged. There's going to be a lot of people going through there, so we knew that concrete was where we were going to be going. And we knew that there wasn't going to be a lot of resources to do something super innovative with the concrete walls that would be necessary to retain this. But we wanted to see if there was another way to use concrete on the site. And these are the early renderings for the project, and it's super clear what people are going to be doing here. They're going to be looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's you can't miss the view. You can see what's going on in the landscape, but what we were thinking about was maybe there is, a piece of this larger landscape that's kind of that's not so noticeable. And so we got really interested in the bathymetry of the bay, so the topography that's happening underneath the water. And we wanted to kind of tell that story as well, which is not so obvious. So we had an intern spend a summer wrestling with some GIS files. They created a Rhino model. We began thinking about how this could be assembled, and we came back to this idea of maybe there's a way to do this in concrete so that it can be really rugged. It can withstand, tons of people touching it and climbing on it. And so we got in contact with a company in Oakland called Concrete Works. And if you don't know them, you should look them up. I see people nodding. They make a lot of furniture. They make stuff that you can buy off the shelf, furniture, fire pits. They also do amazing custom work. They have a awesome fabrication team that can work with digital files and can kind of be involved with that conversation. So we sent them our Rhino file, and they CNC routed foam form, so you can see the topography. And we actually had them do a one-to-one mock-up of this model. We brought it out. We made adjustments to it. This form was then used to cast concrete. So this is a one-to-one. This was actually the kind of final mock-up. And if you've been to our office, you've seen this because it's still running around the office. People love it. It's starting to fall apart a little bit. But you can see, we did this in the style of the pancake model that we build in Studio. And you can see just the precision of the mold that they were able to get. It's just sort of mind-boggling. Some close-up shots. So what this model is doing, this shot's actually interesting because you can see, when it rains, you can actually see how the hydrology is working in the larger landscape. But these are the hills that are on the other side of the bay, and then this is the topography that you don't see that's happening underneath the water, and which I just think is really interesting to think about. I think it kind of opens people's minds to thinking about how all these landscape systems are tied together, that there's this kind of larger thing that's happening that we don't always see. It's ADA accessible. You can touch it. You can climb on it. You can have your Instagram taken with it. The next project that I wanted to talk about, actually there's two of them in here, is, we were approached to do a green roof by a client who had acquired the Warfield Theater, which is a music venue in this space. And the developer had redone the interior office space for the Warfield. So this is Market Street here. This is Golden Gate. And, they wanted something that would be nice to look out the window, look down on. So immediately they wanted to do a green roof. And we went out there, and then we contacted a structural engineer, and we're like, can we put a green roof out here? And they were like, absolutely not. And we were like, can we put potted plants? And they were like, no. So we couldn't do anything because this roof had just been, the waterproofing had just been redone. And it's also a very old building. And so, but the client still really was interested in this idea of doing this big green roof that people would be able to see everywhere. And so we started to think about, well, the green roof that would be out here, people wouldn't be occupying it. It would be something they looked at. So we're flipping through our library, looking at different kind of historical gardens that were done in a way to kind of be evocative, to be viewed, that they're really heavy in pattern or texture. And so, we actually kind of settled on, as a precedent, this is the Orangerie at Versailles. What if we do this play on what a green roof is, that it's actually this thing that you look at and it's not really there, and this is this highly curated piece of garden architecture. Um, but we were also trying to root this idea in our local context. So we were thinking about the redwoods, and maybe there's a way that we can kind of morph these two into this interesting concept design. The materials weren't going to be real landscapes. We knew that, so we started to think about different techniques to deploy this idea across the site. So we looked at textiles, we looked at graffiti art and stencil art, and we eventually came up with this idea of, well, we'll do this painted landscape on this roof. It won't be a real green roof, but it'll look like it from far away and it'll look crazy. And so we proposed this to the client, and they thought it was amazing. And then we had to figure out how the heck to do this, or who to hire to do this type of thing. And so we got in contact with a group called Precita Eyes, who you've probably seen their work everywhere in San Francisco. They've been around for a long time. They do amazing things like this. And they oftentimes work with local youth organizations to get kids involved to help with some of the work. And so we approached them. We explained to them what landscape architecture was, and that we couldn't actually do that on this site, and we wanted to do a painted landscape, and would they be up for it? And they said, sure. And so we started to, but they needed help. They couldn't just go out there and do this. So we needed to do a little bit of work to figure out how to give them some tools to execute what we wanted. So we studied these redwood leaves at different scales. We blew them up. We shrunk them down. At this time, our office was really small. There was probably just 12 of us. So we did not have a laser cutter. So, also part of this story is figuring out, and this was several years ago where it wasn't so easy to get things fabricated, but even just finding out where to get these templates cut and what the templates would be made of was part of the sort of material challenge. So these are some of our early stencils. We played a lot with color and layering to try to find ways to create depth in this landscape so that when you're looking at it, it feels a little three-dimensional. And then, as architects, we thought, well, we'll do a layout plan for these guys, and we'll lay out this geometry, because that's how you have people build things. And they didn't know how to read this type of drawing. So you can see how far, this is actually the finished layout plan, which didn't get very far at all. So we decided just to have the stencils cut. We had them cut out of plastic. We gave them that graphic drawing, and these guys are amazing. And we were like, what information do you need? And they basically just needed that drawing. We experimented with painting. This is one of the client reps, and you can see that even as we were starting to paint this, I think he was unsure about if this was going to work. So we just had them start painting. It wasn't super clean. We had, teenage volunteers helping with this, which we knew was going to be part of the execution. But it's going to be viewed from far away. I think at first we were kind of freaked out because we were like, could be a little bit tidier, but how are you going to manage that? So these are shots during the installation on a nice overcast San Francisco day. It still kind of boggles me that they did this with just chalk on the roof. They drew this pattern out. So that was the original design, and then this is how it finished. This is actually a view from, there's a WeWork in that Golden Gate Theater building, and I went up there with our photographer to get kind of finished shots of this, and everyone in that building loved this and didn't know what it was, but they loved looking out of it. So that was kind of cool to realize that people actually do recognize this landscape. They just don't really know what it is because it's so abstract and weird. So then that client said, oh, I've got another roof that you can't do anything on. Can you do another painted landscape? So we said, okay. And this one is, you might recognize this. This is the off-ramp right after you come off of the Bay Bridge, it kind of spits you down into probably Fremont Street or one of those streets that's kind of downtown. This is the building. She was doing the same thing, renovating the offices. The building is, it's a terrible building. It is surrounded by highway on like every side. And this is the the junk roof that we can't do anything on that we were given. This one actually had a little deck that you could occupy. And so, this is something that wasn't so much going to be viewed from buildings, but viewed from cars getting off of the highway. And so we were studying the context. One thing that's kind of super visible as you're getting off is, the bridge tower, which is huge, but in this perspective looks very small. And so we thought, well, maybe we can do this optical illusion where we kind of pull that bridge geometry forward. And so we did this collage on the roof of different kind of geometries and form that is generated by the infrastructure of the bridge. There was a mechanical screen, so we even kind of did it on this. We had builders for this project, so we could issue drawings like this, and they could execute them. But it's the same group. This one was done after, so we were a little bit more explicit in sort of what we wanted the finished product to look with, because you can see the lines are a little bit more crisp. I can't remember why we went with blue. I think the client just liked blue. And this is a funny shot that I got from someone who was at a Super Bowl party in one of those residential towers and was like, "Didn't you do this little roof over here?" And I was like, "Yeah." So you can't actually see it from other buildings, but the next time you're getting off the bridge to go downtown, look at it. It's a fun little 2-second kind of view. This Hooper Street final project is one that it's probably my most recently completed project. It's right across the street from California College of the Arts in Soma. It was about 3 years ago a gigantic parking lot, and it was used to store tractor trailers. So it was really just kind of the worst. It was just a giant mega block with tractor trailers on it. It has, these kind of big sweeping views of downtown, of Potrero, of all these new things that are being built around the kind of stadium. And so we knew early on that we were going to have a lot of concrete that was going to be waste in this site. And we really early on were interested in finding an innovative way to use that material that was just kind of getting junked. The site program, it's and I'll show in a few slides, it's 2 very long barred buildings with a central alleyway. And the land use for this is, it's maker spaces on the ground level, and it's actually the country's first below market rate maker spaces. So it's spaces designed for people who build furniture, or clothing, or ceramics. They can fabricate on site, and then they have these garage doors that flip up, and they can serve as retail spaces. And there's a central alley where goods can be moved in and out of the site, and people can walk and shop there. And then on the upper levels, it's office. And the developer had made a pretty aggressive commitment to do a lot of stormwater management on the site. So there were kind of a few givens when we inherited this. One, we knew that we had an alleyway that was going to have to function as a service corridor. We knew that we were going to have to integrate stormwater planting, and that we would have to have a lot of bioretention planters within this space, and they would have to also function as gathering spaces. And we knew that the materials would have to be of an industrial nature, that forklifts and trucks would have to drive over these materials, and that seating would have to be arranged in a way to kind of allow for that. So these are my early sketches. This is how I usually start, with just weird little thumbnails. Um, I like this one. The final design looks nothing like this. But I liked this one because we knew that we were going to have to work within a modular system of paving that was going to be economical. And so we were really early on thinking about, well, maybe we can pop that up in 3D and use it as furniture so that even though it is kind of the, most cost-effective paver on the market, that if we're using it in interesting ways, it could kind of elevate it. This is one of those bars. CCA's over here. There's a public plaza with a brewery that is about to open. So there is a kind of larger gathering space too. But what I like about these drawings is you can start to see the evolution of some of the components. The form of the stormwater planter, which was kind of inspired by these cracks in the site, the modularity of the paving system, which might even inform some of the kind of other site features. Super early sketch development. And this is when we started to find a use for that concrete, in that we could use it as some of the furniture on the site. We explored using it as walls. That's not going to work because the Public Utilities Commission isn't going to accept that. We can't use it as paving because it's not permeable. So what could we do with it? And we always had this idea of, aggregating seeding clusters around these planting areas so that they're not just treating stormwater, but they're actually kind of informing where people gather. So we developed this idea to use them as some of the furniture. Whoops. This is a diagram to kind of just explain what was happening with the stormwater. Essentially, all the water is being kind of channeled down into these planters. They're connected, and then they exit out to the city system. Function diagram, you can see, the larger kind of site. These are the two. This is bar one and the second bar. So these are really big buildings, and the alley is very narrow, but still had to accommodate all of this kind of maneuverability. And this was also sort of dictating the geometry that we were playing with, the cadence of these planters. And so then we got to the concrete. These guys really did not want to save any of the old concrete because it was a headache. So we negotiated that what about the concrete that the job site trailers sit on? There were a bunch of job site trailers. So you can see there used to be a job site trailer here, and they moved it. And then we attacked. And we had them cut these pieces of concrete into smaller pieces and store them in the parking garage once that was constructed. And even then, I think once they started to stack these is when I got a little bit nervous because I wasn't sure if they were going to crumble when we sandwiched them together, if someone was going to hate them, if an ADA person was going to come out from the city and tell us that this wasn't going to work for some reason. But we convinced them to do that. The other materials were concrete, composite wood. It's a very simple palette. I put this material plan in here because this is a materials lecture, but I don't know if I'm actually going to talk about it. But I will talk about this, which was, when we were doing this, when you're working with a found material, it really kind of, it becomes quite a challenge to figure out how to document that. How do you convey exactly what you want? And how is this material going to be set? How is it, what is its setting bed? How does it interface with, the pavers that are coming off the shelf. So this was all new to us, and kind of, it took a little bit of time, even though they were just these concrete benches, it took time to really figure out what the dimensions of them were, how they would be assembled. I had a really great designer who was working with me on this, who did spend a lot of time doing the layout plan for all of these geometries. So you can see this is when they were starting to form up some of these planters. The buildings are connected by bridges. And then, midway through the project, the Public Utilities Commission told us that the paving that we were using was not going to work. It did not meet their standard that had just been released. And this was sort of a catastrophic material moment, a material breakdown maybe, where we had to pave a huge area. So, we really had to dial in the cost. We did not have a lot of options. The paver had to be, 3 3/8 inches thick and have integral spacers and all these requirements that, the market really hasn't even caught up to some of these requirements. And so we found this paver, which had been, it has largely been installed in strip mall parking lots, progressive communities that have McDonald's with the permeable parking lot. It had been used really for basic kind of executions. It was not something that you'd find featured in Landscape Architecture magazine, but it fit the bill and it fit the requirements. And so we went back and we thought about how we could use standard off-the-shelf covers to create some interest. So we have kind of darker colors collecting at where the water collects, lighter ones kind of fanning out. We actually, these, you can read these lines. These come in pallets, and you just pop them down into place. And the way that the manufacturer had designed this was that, you don't read these pallet lines, that this would be in a running bond, so that you don't read those cross pattern lines. But we actually really liked them. The architecture is so oppressive. It's an industrial kind of warehouse sort of feeling to it. And so we convinced the installer to do it this way, and they were just really confused why we would want to do that. But we were like, because this is a dumb paver, and we want to express its true properties, and this is how it comes. So this is what we're going to do. And I just remember being really scared that like a truck would back up and shift one of these, and like they would be out of sync. But I think it ended up looking really sharp, and I've never seen something like that. It literally is just the pallets kind of placed one after the other. These are the finished benches. So you can see we took the two and sandwiched them together with just a little bit of mortar to create a shadow line. We had them pour just a little pad and mortar them to those, so they sit on these. We're using them as benches, but we also wanted to use them as sort of monuments to the former kind of composition of the site, so we even put them in the planting, and they're starting to sink, which is really kind of funny. And we didn't actually think too much about this, so this guy is already kind of creeping down. So this is the bioretention planter. This was probably one of the first moments where I felt like I had done something that looked really slick. I mean, these benches looked like they came from Germany and were like $15,000 a piece. They were just so cool looking, and they were just junk concrete. And I almost wish we would have done more of them. There's probably 50 on the site. So these are the types of spaces that happen in here. So you can see the kind of length of this. This is 7th Street down here. And it's funny to imagine this paving having been installed the way they intended it to. I think that was another interesting lesson about working on this project is sometimes, when you're limited by a cost or a construction constraint, there is a way to kind of innovate even an off-the-shelf material and do something different with it. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Nick. That's great.
Yeah.
Those benches almost have a sedimentary rock look to them to me. They're kind of beautiful. There's a kind of, even though it's concrete, it looks almost like a piece of the earth.
It's really interesting you saw the quality of that concrete. They were just parking tractor trailers on there for years and years and years. And then when you cut it in section, even, dumb concrete has these material properties that can be really stunning. And I don't think we were expecting it to look like that. I think we thought it would be a little bit more unfinished. But yeah, the aggregate someone was like, "Is this marble?" And I was like, it was not a designer who asked me this. I was like, no, this is the parking lot that used to be here.
Well, the cutting's very precise, and that helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take a few questions.
I just have a comment more.
Yeah.
Off of that. It's interesting how like sedimentary rock or other materials that we use for paving pretty often are typically a result of different geological periods, mining of different rock, etc. And this is it's like a mark of the Anthropocene. It's the same, but it's cool.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Questions?
Actually, how thick are those slabs?
The slab was incredibly inconsistent.
Yeah.
Because when they were pouring this, they weren't thinking that we were going to do something with it. So that was also a problem because we couldn't use all of the pieces. It was like 6 to 8 inches thick.
Yeah.
I think we thought since they were parking all these big trucks on there that it would be like a foot thick or something.
Oh, I see.
And it wasn't. It was much thinner. And it was, it varied so much. So I think they were 8 inches thick. So that's 16 inches. And then we did, an inch in the middle and an inch at the bottom to get it up to 18 inches, so it's about seat height.
The variation in the thicknesses also adds a certain natural organic element to it that actually kind of plays onto it. I think it kind of adds that. Yeah, exactly.
And this was the thing, this was really scary because, I think the guys that were out here working understood, we showed them renderings, we did these drawings, but like we would go out there and they'd be trying to saw this thin and so it's a nice clean edge and we're like, no, don't do that. You're ruining them. And they're like, we don't know what you want. So, when you're doing these things, it also just really flips everything upside down. How do you communicate with someone that's building something, especially when it's something that's sort of wacky and in a material that's really inconsistent? It was a really interesting learning experience about how to really get them not only to understand what you wanted to do, but you have to get them excited about it. And we did in the end. We had guys that were like, these look great. But it took us a while to get them there so that, they would take care and really execute it in a way that looked good. So,
yeah.
It seems to me.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, it seems from like the stories from these 4 projects and the materials that, in terms of a design decision, that there's a lot more. These were, you made these design decisions. The roof, the first painting, you were like, I'm not there sure if this is going to work. Yeah, the pictures of those in the warehouse to that right there, it's miles difference. It looks so good, and it just seems like it's like a risk, not riskier, but a design decision that you have to follow through more at the end to make sure your vision is
it's terrifying. Yeah, it's scary because you don't know exactly what's going to happen. Of course, now it's like if I ever find a site that has a big parking lot, I'm going to, can we save a section and we're going to do something with it because it looks really pretty when you cut it in section. But it's scary. It is. When we did the painted roof, those guys just do such amazing work. Any of the murals you see in San Francisco. So I think we felt a little safe once they were on board because we knew that whatever they would do, it would be really stunning. We didn't know if it would look like what we had drawn, and we were kind of willing to accept that because I'm not going to go out there and try to paint that. This thing also, I mean, really until they were installed, I didn't know if they were going to work. And like immediately the sky started sinking because this is all lightweight soil, for percolation, which we kind of knew like there'd be some settling, but like 2 days later he was noticeably lower, and it was like, oh no. But in a way, I kind of like it, and you should go out and look at this site. It's open to the public. You can walk through here. There's not a lot that's in here. There's an arc across on this way, which I think is funny. The printing company has moved in, but these might just completely disappear one day, and maybe that's okay. I don't know. It was an experiment that didn't quite work out. They're not meant to be occupied, but I kind of like that. The fact that that's the thing that failed is fine by me.
And in terms of like risk to what you got out of it, like you said, you were really scared during the process during that, but as you also said, that came out looking like it could have been a multi-$1,000 thing flown in, where you could have taken a decision that didn't make you as scared and was less risky, but it would have cost you more money, and this had a connection to the site and probably saved you a lot.
The client loved this because it was free too.
Yeah, exactly.
In the end. And I feel like he said that in the end, and it was like, okay, well, that's great, but...
It's kind of Andy Goldsworthy in a way, We're taking materials from the site and reusing them in some way. Do we have any online questions?
There are no questions right now yet.
Okay.
So was there? You can just repeat it. Was there a sealer?
Was there a sealer on them?
I think we did end up sealing it because it was crumbling a little bit, and we just didn't want people to get dust all over them, so we did seal. And you still do, I sat on them and I was like, they get you a little dusty, but I don't know, you're outside.
Right, right.
So yeah, we did seal the sides of them.
Anybody else?
Thought it was really interesting, and the one about the Sutro Baz, you talked about them having a warehouse, and
Yeah.
wondering because I've seen I'm always interested in any story where it's like there's warehouses of just old things lying around that had no value, just like those guys were chopping up that concrete and were ready to throw it. Like anything plus time is value. And
But it's amazing. I remember when we found this, I was like, is this normal for cities to have all these cool historical objects sitting in the basement? And I think actually it does.
yeah,
happen.
no, I'm sure
We have a few projects that we're working on right now, either on the bayfront or another park that I'm doing, which is on the channel that comes off of the bay, in Mission Bay. And both of them we have to interact with the port with, and they're like, oh, well, we got all these old buoys and boats. You wouldn't want those, would you? And we're like, yes, we do. Where are they?
Yeah.
And so I think we have just, with this project, and anyone that's working with the Park Service, you should always ask if there's things lying around. But I think we're always interested in weird, pieces of the site or things that contextualize the site and kind of bring a history to it. And there's just so much that's lying around.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
It brings a set of challenges to it. How do you make something safe? How do you make something so that people can sit on it and they don't have rust all over their backside? There's a whole kind of set of challenges that come to that. I remember we had to get a special graffiti guy to come in and treat all these things because they didn't want people kind of marking them up. So, all these things that you don't have to worry about when you're doing off-the-shelf stuff. It becomes a little bit more complicated, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah. It made me think of a few months ago I just saw that documentary, the They Will Never Grow Old, that one about World War I, World War II. Oh, jeez.
Oh.
But they essentially the British government had all this monstrous amount of old footage, and they just gave it to Peter Jackson. They were like, "Hey, do you want to do anything with this?" And that, in the same vein, and I really think that's really cool, and I wish they would do that, but I'm sure cities and governments don't have money to pay for things that they need, much less some dude to troll through old things to find something that I might like to put in a park. You know,
It's I feel like we haven't run into so much of an issue with the city. It's honestly a lot of times it's the contractor. They don't want to take on a liability of how this gets anchored, or what if it falls over, or what if someone rips their shirt on it, and so that's just that. It's just a conversation that you have to really work on and get them to kind of really trust you, and to get them excited about doing this and to want to help you problem solve it.
And one of the things that I find interesting about service design in your work in particular is that you're open to these opportunities, that when you conceive of the design, you have some idea of how, as it's evolving, of what it is you're going to do, but then things happen, like a parking lot that you cut up, or you find a lion in a warehouse somewhere, and you're very open to incorporating that. And I think it's great. It adds this kind of spontaneous energy to the project. It's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like we never expect to design the site 100%. That we always, not that we don't want to finish things, but I feel like we always like to get it to like 75%, so that there is this 25% that is sort of going to be a surprise, that people are going to use the space maybe differently than we thought. We have this wall at Fort Point, which is supposed to be a seat wall, and everyone stands up and does this jumpy thing, and someone takes their photo. It's like, well, that's not really how we wanted that to be used, but that's great.
It's great if they do it.
Right. I think we understand that things age, that I've been to Land's End and it looks great, and I've been to Land's End and it looks really scrappy, and it looks like things aren't making it, and maybe we need to put some new plants in there, but or the wood is aged, and I think that just, we never design things to be pristine forever. We want them to evolve, and we want people to use them in different ways as culture evolves, and so I think that's just how we operate.
Right. Well, if there are no further questions, I will wrap this up. Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you.
For coming. It's
Thank
great
you.
to have you.
Thank you.